WesWes, y'all.
Kia ora, talofa lava, and welcome to the Counter Ruck, a podcast where we discuss all things rugby. I'm the host of the Counter Ruck, Stacey, so thanks for joining us for another edition. We're joined today by a lot of our regular panel that you guys know, our regular listeners will know. So I'll start by introducing everyone. And we've got a legend of Papakura rugby, and a knowledgeable man in the rugby circles, Sale. Sale, thanks for jumping on us.
Yeah, not to thank you. Thank you again for allowing me to jump on board. And it's been a long time, but it's good to see you boys doing well yourself.
Yeah, no, cheers, mate. We also have Counties Manukau. I'll say Counties Manukau supporter serving in the Mai to 10 Cup season. And Waitemata Rugby stalwart, Rog. Rog, thanks for jumping on, brother.
Talofa lava, kia ora, kia ora.
All right, boys, so I'll just take care of some housekeeping things before we get into it. So our website's up and running. Check us out there, www.weswesnet.com. And don't forget to click the support us button on the page to keep the content going and keep the lights on and all that sort of stuff. And also you can follow the Counter Ruck on Twitter and Facebook. So give us a follow and give us a like on there. Okay, boys, so now rugby, it's been a bit stop-start in this part of the world, with New Zealand going through various stages of the lockdown. The rugby championships wrapped up as well. So we thought we'd try to do something a bit different today and bring you a special episode and look back at a significant moment in Pacific rugby history. So on October 19th, 1991, about 30 years ago to the day, the mighty Manu Samoa had one of their greatest ever results when they made the quarterfinals of the Rugby World Cup that year. So, boys, I want to spend this episode reflecting back on the 30-year anniversary of that achievement and look at the team and also look at what happened in the preceding years after and why the Manu didn't kick on after that and become a genuine Tier 1 nation. So a lot to get through, but Rog, I suppose as the elder statesman of Counter Ruck, I'll come to you first, because you've got a good memory of the 91 World Cup. Just tell us your memories and thoughts of the 91 World Cup, and obviously in particular the Manu team, who were the darlings of that World Cup tournament and just on the way to making the quarterfinals.
Well, just off without any research, I can't recall what stage. Oh, actually, it was the quarterfinals of was it the quarterfinal? I can't even remember if it was a quarterfinal. No, definitely not, because the quarterfinal they lost in the quarterfinals.
They lost the quarterfinal to Scotland.
Oh, yeah. So pool play, I don't know where it fell in terms of pool play, but I do recall the morning. I don't, the recollection's quite a little bit hazy, but it was the morning. Had to go to school, but we were watching it early hours of the morning on One World of Sport, I think it was running as back then. And we didn't get to finish the whole game because I had to go to school. But I remember To'o Vaenga still scoring that try. And how, if it was adjudicated as it is now, quite tight by TMOs in that, I don't think it would have been awarded a try. But To'o Vaenga scores the try, and it was a bit sketchy as to whether he actually got a hand on the ball. But man, it was a life-changing moment, I guess, for Manu Samoa, and it pretty much put Samoa on the map. But the referee was running behind. Still not quite up with the play where the players were, if I recall correctly, and he just, without even a hesitation, just raised his arm, blew the whistle. It was a try to To'o Vaenga, and Manu Samoa were well on their way to winning that match, and I think it was the first try of that match as well, for the Manu. So To'o, and there's a little doco that To'o talks about years later that was filmed, as to how he recollects, how he recalls that moment. But obviously Carter Farms Park, and then he named his eldest son after the park because of that that moment in history. So there's a Carter Vaenga that played throughout NPC, and I think he was in and around the Hurricanes super setup as well in years gone by. But he played for Southland and Counties Manukau as well. Carter Vaenga, so that's who he was named after, due to the heroics of not only the Manu Samoa team but his father. all those years ago.
Maybe Moana Pasifika might be looking at Cardiff. They're looking for some players, so you never know. But yeah, it's good because on third, the Manu hardly ever gets any calls, so I'm glad we got one of those 50-50 calls. And at Wales home ground too. I mean, shucks, playing Wales in Wales, and a team like the Manu get a favourable call, which changed the course of their history. And it's awesome. What about you, Sally, mate? Have you got any early memories? It might be a bit early for you, the 91 World Cup and the Manu team.
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah, I remember running around in my diapers and 91. I was probably only 2 years old. Probably can't recall much from that, but more so further down the line, when every time I would tune in for the next following World Cups, that was always pretty much what set the standard for the Manu moving forward. But I do as we briefly touched on it, I've watched some of the replays from earlier on. And from what I can see in that game, it's what it doesn't show is the physicality of how the Manu played back then, and that's probably pretty much what put all the Tier 1 nations, on the back foot and started realizing, man, there's potential for pretty darn good force coming out of the Pacific, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of what started all these eligibility rules, and what kind of started, because pretty much from there, this is where you see the shift of seeing the All Blacks starting to look at more of the Poly boys, try to get them more involved in the All Blacks outfit and in the team environment. But just from the game itself, I remember, probably the last time we'll probably see a team where most of them, probably majority of the team, probably didn't play any professional footy. Most of them were probably club players or on the outer ranks of representative teams. Young Brian Lee Ma, young Toa Maenga, Peter Fetz, Pat Lam. And Pat Lam, I remember, was that the same game he got an intercept try?
That was 99 World Cup.
99, yeah. But I remember all I remember from that 91 team was the fact that most of them are homebred players, and not much experience in terms of representative footy, and that's probably pretty much what shocked one of the moments why it shocked the world, especially the Tier 1 nation, seeing a team with that much not much experience challenge, like a team like Wales, who's been in the Rugby World Circuit for years. But that's my brief memory on it.
Yeah. Because you talked about how a lot of players, the All Blacks, started to take notice. So Stephen Bishop was part of that 91 team. He obviously went on to play for the All Blacks, and Frank Bunce, who became one of the greatest All Black midfielders. He got his early chances with Manu Samoa in that 91 World Cup as well. So, so the Manu Samoa, they were in quite a difficult pool. Well, by today's standards, I think they were in a difficult pool. I'm just trying to have a look who was in their pool now. They had Australia, who ended up winning the tournament, Wales, who were a genuine Tier 1 nation and playing at home, the Manu Samoa, and Argentina, who kicked on to become a genuine Tier 1 nation from there. So pretty hard pull by today's standards, at least. And I remember you talked about that game against Wales, and that's where the buzz, particularly from a lot of the Samoans and New Zealand, where they think, shucks, we've beaten a genuine Tier 1 nation. We're a realistic chance getting out of the pool stages. So, Roger, mate, have you got any other thoughts on the pool stages or the quarterfinal? Because they played Scotland, and I don't have a lot of recollection of that game, but looking at the score, it wasn't a good game for us. So, just have you got any thoughts on the quarterfinal as well?
Well, I think even leading up to that quarterfinal, because was it when they played against Australia as well in that pool play, and they lost? Was it 6-3 or 6-9? Or it was only penalties, if I recall right.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I'm just pulling it up now. 9-3 it was.
9-3. So Samoa were in the mix, and I think it was a real muddy, wet day. And from what I recall, is just Samoa were in with a chance, and then I think Australia were thankful that they had that bruising encounter with Samoa, because obviously, like Sully mentioned, that's when the world got to see how hard hitting these Pacific Islanders were, who ended up being the darlings of the World Cup 91. But it was just their hard hitting defense that softened up the Australians, and then basically they were put in good stead moving on into the deeper ends of the tournament. But I just remember them doing really well against Australia, but then obviously not good enough to end up taking that quarterfinal against Scotland. And Scotland just ended up, I think, especially through the 90s, even though we had a pretty good attacking sort of style of rugby, we just couldn't really topple Scotland. I think they're a little bit of our bogey team even now, because we had the likes of Apollo Perenini in that World Cup, and that's where he made a name for himself, and Peter Fatialofa, who was probably the only one, as well as Apollo, playing for Auckland at the time. And Pat Lam as well. But a lot of them, like Sally mentioned, were club players coming out of Australia, as well as a lot from Samoa, around Wellington, Auckland as well. But yeah, just can't really recall too much of that. But what was the final score for that Scotland game, the quarterfinal?
The final score was 28-6. So Scotland, like you mentioned, they had the Hastings guys, who were some of the best ever players to come out of Scotland, were part of that World Cup, and they went on to play the semi-finals against England, where they lost 9-6. So they were a lot better than they've been in recent times. So yeah, not much to write on them, but it was Waya got a penalty, and Stephen Bishop got a drop goal. So yeah, not much. But what are your thoughts? They were the darlings of the World Cup, obviously. And I remember '95, they also had a decent World Cup. But after that, it's been pretty poor. But I wanted to look at this '91 team. Is that our best ever team? I'll come to you there, Rog. Where would you rank this team in the great teams?
Well, they're always going to be one of our greatest teams because of the mark that they left at that international tournament, albeit being the second World Cup, but that ever took place. But I think it was just the way that they brought through these players, and a lot of them that were playing and plying their trade in New Zealand, but then also a lot of the ones that were based in Samoa, which we don't really see much now, who are being unearthed, that talent from Samoa. Like, I remember Untitled Chapter, who was our fullback, and he just had the calves of doom. His socks were down all the time, and I just remember his calves, and every time he would go down and the camera would just zoom in on his calves, and that, everyone sort of was now familiar with an Anitelea Aolupo. I think he was known as Andrew Aolupo in the team sheets, but Anitelea is what I remember him as. But then Brian Limar, Timo Tangaloa, who was playing his trade in New Zealand, and then he qualified for, I think he played New Zealand A at one stage, and then obviously turning out on the wing for Manu Samoa. And you've also mentioned the guys like Frank Bunce, who again were playing in North Harbour and Auckland Bees at the time, and then when North Harbour was came to be in 1989, that's when or 86, and that's when Buncey was able to play NPC. But Sila Vaifale was another one who unearthed from the Mara St. Joseph's. There was quite a few from Mara St. Joseph as well. And then I think there's talk about the Alator brothers. So their father was a prop in that squad as well, Vili Alator. And so he was playing out of Manly, RUFC. But and they talk about it now and the feats that they were able to accomplish 30 years ago. So they know that it's still a lot. There's a lot of potential that probably hasn't been achieved since those feats of 91 and then also 99. Why they haven't pushed on, I guess there's a lot of factors that come into play there as well. But it was just so good to see a lot of the players, and we became familiar with Mata'afa Keenan, got our first red card. But he was a great lock. He was a good lock. And then you heard of the Burt Whistles who were playing. I remember playing out of suburbs here in Auckland. So there were guys, and Peter Fatialofa, who was obviously playing not only for Auckland but for Ponsonby as well. So a lot of players that who wouldn't have got the chance. And we know the exploits of Peter Fatialofa. He wasn't too far off becoming an All Black. Yet went on to be a legend of a Manu Samoa player.
Yeah. Eddie Ioane is another one there. That's the father of Rico and Akira Ioane.
Yep,
So
that's right.
some good genes in this team. When you talk about the Ala Tours and the Ioanes in this team. But yeah, mate, Sully, where do you rank this 91 World Cup team when you're talking about our greatest ever Manu Samoa teams?
Oh, definitely top three. I would be it'll be hard pushed to say maybe the second team. Probably my favorite team from just watching over the years is probably our 2011 World Cup team, the one when the World Cup was here in NZ. The only reason being that was probably our first team where, see, with back then with the 91 team, we were attacking, good on defense, but we were a dry weather football team, eh? Obviously coming from the islands and from Auckland or NZ and Australian Samoa, not used to playing in that cold weather rugby. So, if I recall, I think in that Scotland game, it was just either a lot of kicking and just a lot of set piece for them, and that's something that probably Samoa weren't really that good at back then. They were just good at getting the ball out wide and then just feeding the speed. Whereas our 2011 World Cup team, man, we had probably the top three best coaching staff that like not just in general, but like in that whole probably World Cup outfit with all the teams. We had Dickey, Ozzie McLean, Tom Coventry, pretty much some of the guys that are helping out with the Samoa coaching system right now. And then just look at the players that we had in the 2011 World Cup. Man, it was like pretty much guys who were either at the end of their peak, or just guys that I don't know how, if I can recall, like we were pretty hard done by in that World Cup with some results. I remember Wales beat us, and that was quite unfortunate. We had Roger running at 10 to see Salavia, and then but he got concussed early. Remember in Tusipisi, he had to pull out with I think it was a hammy injury. But man, like the amount of depth that we had at like all positions within those teams, and then just I don't know. For me, it was just that 2011 team was the most in terms of like set piece play, in terms of play around the field, the structure that they had in this on the field was just probably the best I've ever seen a Manu Samoa team. Probably the only thing that we were missing was the same issue we've had for years. It's just a good 10. That World Cup was probably where the All Blacks were probably like probably punching themselves for not taking a risk or taking a leap of faith on Khan for Tuali'i. I mean, they did have Aaron Smith, but man, imagine if they had both of those guys, they'd be like untouchable at the number 9 position.
Yeah, that 2011 team, all the players as well, they come from like elite clubs as well. So, really professional outfits in Europe, like, London Irish and Bordeaux, Clermont, and these types of elite clubs. So they've come from elite environments where they could bring that into the team. So good shout on that 2011 team. I didn't actually think of that. I like the 95 team. It was essentially a lot of the 91 team because they were still quite young. They got to the quarterfinals again, but George Lopepe was the guy who was there, another young kid. George Harder, who I liked, and George Harder there, Rog, and Darren Kellett, one of my favourite first fives that we had. He played in that 95 team, so I like that team. They Brian Limar was back again, so we talked about him. He was 19 years old at that 91 World Cup. So I'll just put this out there: who's the greatest player we've had? Like in the Manu, like I'll give an early shout for Brian Lima. I think it's an easy, obvious choice, but he was 19 at that 91 World Cup, and he really set it alight. And I remember thinking, shucks, who's this guy who's sort of come out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere? And after that, he went on to kick on from there. But have you got any thoughts about who our best ever player is for the Manu?
Sully, you go first.
Sorry to put
Man,
you boys on the spot. I just thought of that
bro,
now when I was
that's
looking
such a
at these
hard one.
teams on the team sheet.
We're looking at purely Manu Samoa or Rugby World Cups? Manu Samoa.
And just Manu Samoa. Yeah, anyone who's played for the Manu. Like I'm a bit biased. I think that he's my favorite player for the Manu as well. So I'll put it really shouting for Brian Lima. And Simul Satiti is another guy who I've got a soft spot for.
Mm. Well, you look at some of those guys, I guess, like Brian Lima, purely on endurance and longevity. I mean, durability. Brian Lima was similar to the likes of, I guess, he equates to the sort of legendary status that Atana Umanga has, starting on the wing and then moving in his later years into the midfield. And we saw that with Brian Lima, and I think that added to him being able to, he's got a record with two other guys in the world having played at 5 Rugby World Cup. So, so I guess he can easily come into that conversation as being one of our most legendary Manu Samoa players. Also, but then you've got to look at like a guy like Pat Lam, who was involved in that 91 World Cup as well, and
Yep.
and went to 2 quarterfinals just like Brian Lima. But he was he sort of cemented his status as a good captain and a leader for Manu Samoa for those campaigns, and then established his career overseas because of his exploits with Manu Samoa. And then you've got like Simul Tiziti, like you say, but then we've got Peter Fatialofa, who was,
Yes.
massive reason as to why Manu Samoa had huge following. He was the captain of them in that 96 tour of New Zealand after the 95 World Cup. And I just remember John Campbell being in awe of him, just still shaking salt over his food for the longest time and being in disbelief as to how much salt Peter Fats was eating. But again, there could be others. Census Johnson for the amount of games he's played. Does he come into that conversation? Because I think Brian Lima, 66.
No, Roger.
Roger,
Just going to put it out there straight away.
Who
No.
your friends are in the Manu Samoa.
We're
not talking about who your friends are in the Manu. We're talking about
No. I'm just talking about.
Come on.
We'll go caps. How many caps? So again, Census Johnson in terms of caps is up there as well. So
right.
That's the only reason why I'm mentioning Census. Because he was at a stage the face of Manu Samoa, before he retired. So
now, good shout on Census because the Manu have struggled for players, but there was a time where he was considered a genuine world class prop. So when you pull the Manu teams up and who they got who was world class, he was at least one guy you could put up and say this guy scrummaging and set piece work is right up there with some of the best in the world. Based on what his exploits in the European club teams and stuff. So not a bad shout. Have you got anyone that comes to mind for you there, Sully? Not mates. We're not talking about your mates. We're talking about who you think is our greatest player in the Manu.
Yeah, this one's a bit controversial. Michael Jones. He only played like one or few caps, but he is one of the best players ever. So how would you he still played for the Manu, and he is one of the best players to ever play. So that's what I mean. It might be controversial. He didn't have many games for the Manu. I think he only played one. I don't think it was an official cap, but I know one test. Yeah, he played one test, and then he changed allegiance to the All Blacks. Yeah. So that was pretty much on the eve of the '87 World Cup, and then he changed allegiance in that same year.
So that's when you could do that because I think he was over.
Yeah, there was no stand down period too back then. It was just probably it will be Michael Jones. Yeah, don't have to be the chiropractor. Just longevity. I think he is probably still now with those players that can remember, still revered as one of the hardest hitters in the game. and that's from a winger. You know, like
Yeah.
that's unheard of, eh? Like, and that's what I mean. Back to that 99-1 team, man. You go right throughout that whole field, everyone could probably put you flat on your ass, you know. And like to
Yeah,
see
yeah.
to see wingers pull off that kind of hits. Um, even his hit in the '99 World Cup against Derek Hogard is probably still one of the best hits ever. Eh? And even though we were getting pumped in that game, but you know, every Samoan walked away from that game proud just for that one hit, and we're like, "Yep, we'll take that, man. We'll take that." But yeah, now Brian Lee Muff, what he's done, even having a successful career over here in Auckland, then later down in the Highlanders, yeah, and just his longevity, like Roger was saying, man, like that's ridiculous how many World Cups, and probably one of the only few players who's like, yeah, that's made a good transition from the outside into the midfield, but at the same time, like not losing like a step or not looking out of place. So that's probably one
Mm.
reason why I've got to have the chiropractor up there.
Yeah, yeah. To'o is another guy who deserves a shout. Just looking at some of the player records. So Brian Lima is obviously the most capped. To'o is second, 61 caps for the Manu. I didn't realize he played that many games, but yeah, 86 to 2001, he had a really long stay, and he was starting quite a lot as well. He's one of those automatic picks, and you can't. Anyone who's watched him play, he had that footwork as well, which is outstanding. Any love for Tusi BC? Just I'll put a shout out for my old Messi High mates.
Hey, I was one of his harshest critics in the last World Cup, only because I think he played a World Cup too long. But in saying that, like, I think the thing with him is, um, he was so proud to represent his country, and there was, to be honest and to be fair to him, no really other good tens out there, um, or anyone that put up their hand to play for Samoa. So I remember in that 2011 World Cup, had he not gotten injured, we would have beaten Wales. We were close to beating South Africa, but then we got cheated of. The ref, sin bin someone for something that was ridiculous. I forgot who it was. But yeah, no, Tussi's the man. Tussi's the man. What he did in this that short brief window from 2011 to 2015, like probably has to go down as one of the best tens that we've had the luxury of putting on the jersey for the Manu.
And
What
did he
about you,
get
Rog?
caught into the 2000? Did he get caught into the 2019 World Cup? Was he? And he was there as
Yeah,
well. And so
yeah.
that goes to show, the quality of him and what he offered the team. And he did come into I think he was in his late 20s when he first donned the blue jersey for Samoa. But I think if you look at what he was able to achieve and how long he played for Manu Samoa, and we didn't have any, like you say, Sale, quality 10s at the time. 2011 was probably, I would rank Tusi as our number 110. And like you say, I remember when he got injured, was it Namibia? I was like,
Yeah.
he's
That game down in
silly.
Rotorua and so that's. But at the same time, I think it was the coaching. They like maximized the ability of all the players, and especially with Tusi, like the way that the game plan that they had for him, man, like use your up and under. Just all you do is just guide the ball around. Don't take on the line when it's on when it's open in front of you. But man, like that's what I mean. The coaching management team that they had back then, man, like yeah, probably like even if you look down, like you said, the 99, 95, probably a lot more talent in terms of like within that era or within that year period compared to what we had in 2011. But it was just the fact like the system maximized the abilities of each individual in order to play at their best, and that's why I'll always have that team ranked the highest, man. Like you had what do you call it, George Stowers. He was like old school NZ Colts, and but then he went overseas,
Mm.
doing well overseas. Sina Tuifua, he just recently cracked the NPC 3 counties, and he was another hard hitter as well. Maury Fatsavalu making switches between league and union back and forth, but
Oh, I love him, mate. Yeah.
yeah, bro, like he epitomized
Yeah,
what it
Maurice
meant to.
Fasavalu, that was, wasn't he playing? Did he play for Great Britain as well? Played league for
Yeah,
Great
yeah,
Britain.
yeah,
And then he
yeah.
came back, and played for Manu as well. So we had some, and to bear, you got to understand also, hey, that it was amateur era from '91 right through '95, and then things were starting to become professional. But yeah, you can't go wrong with that 2011 World Cup team, like you say, Sally, because you had a leader like Mohanri Schwalger coming out of the Chiefs environment, and and at that time he had just won a title with the Chiefs. Got to mention that as well, and so he was coming out of an environment of success, and even though we didn't progress in that World Cup, but you could see the following that the Samoan boys had because of what they had achieved in the years leading up to especially being in New Zealand, massive Pacific following here for Tonga, Fiji, as well as Samoa, but the backing that our Samoan team had there was just outstanding, and I think we were all encouraged and hoping that, as well as New Zealand wanting to win a first World Cup since '87, we were also, as Samoa, our second or first team, we were wanting them to do just to better the quarterfinals, but wasn't to be. I still remember watching that game against Wales, and poor Tasesa Lavere was tasked with the job at hand, and just a few penalties and a few bad calls went our way, and was enough to sink our hopes of progressing in that tournament. But I think Khan Fotuali'i, another awesome player who could double up as a first five, but who was playing first five and halfback for Hawke's Bay before that, and but yeah, you couldn't say that we were down on talent. There was a lot of experienced players, but Mohanri Schwalger, a massive leader in that time, and then obviously we knew what
Seilala
happened
Mapasua
following.
as well.
Seilala Mapasua. Was
Who's the
Filippo
coach?
Levi still playing as well? Yeah. Seilala now coaching.
We had like Kane Thompson at lock. There was another. Who was a? Yeah, we had some. Yeah, even our front row, man, really good. We had, what was his name? Taulafo, Zach Taulafo.
Oh yeah, Sakaria.
Yeah, Zakaria.
Taulafo,
Yeah,
he was a good player.
really good prop, and he ended
Yeah.
up signing up with the Wasps and that, and he was. Good thing with some of those players, they actually had some like Mitre 10 or Super Rugby experience. So, in terms of speed of the game, their fitness levels that was probably one of the fitter Manu Samoa teams as well, if I'm not mistaken. We should have had, what's his name? Who was the Sika Five? Who's always like controversial on the lawyer Eliota Sapolo.
Eliota.
He should have started most games, and I felt like, out of respect for Seilala, like, or even have them as a midfield combination would have been awesome. Only because I think, what's his name? Eliota was actually he got player of the premiership or something like that, like MVP of the tournament.
That's right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
but in that game against
He was
South
in great
Africa,
form, mate.
he was awesome, man. Like, that's exactly what we needed out in the midfield, just a punch and just some unpredictable type of play in the midfield, just get some go forward. But no, man, that's all. That was a really awesome team.
Yeah, so it's hard to narrow it down. We've had some great teams and some great players. It's hard to quite narrow it down. But I'll put my hand up for Brian Lima. Also, Afato So'oalo, forgot to mention. He was a beast for the Crusaders. He was one of their best players on the wing. And 16 tries and 18 starts for the Manu. So that's pretty outstanding for him. But I just wanted to look at moving on a bit. But yes, obviously we focused a lot on the '91 World Cup team, obviously for the anniversary and stuff. But the Manu also made the quarterfinals in '95 as well. And then the game goes professional in '96. And essentially, the Manu Samoa have been left behind, and they've never made it back to the playoffs ever since. So a lot of people thought that the Manu would kick on and become a powerhouse of world rugby after '91 and '95, but that never really happened. So wanted to sort of talk about why we think that happened. Mate, Sally, mate, I'll come to you first, brother. Have you got any thoughts as to why Manu's essentially gone backwards since those early '90s?
I think it
and
was
sort of been
just
left behind a bit.
Yeah. I touched on it briefly before. I think it was once they changed those eligibility rules, it made players to start considering, like, their financial afterlife in terms of after their career. So most of the times, you get some really good players, either selecting the black jersey or looking to play overseas. And I think with Samoa even back then in the late '90s, most of their did have a trial in Samoa, but they never trial out here in Auckland. I remember going to one of them. I think it was out at Waitemata, just as a young kid. It was, oh man, there's so many like different factors. For me, it would probably be just the overall um, the structure of the rugby union in Samoa as well, in terms of like who you have as your upper management all the way down to the coaches. Probably never really had something as we probably had no real structure. For me, like we had as much as Michael Jones was a really good player. I don't think he's probably had any really good coaching experience. And after that '95 World Cup, building towards '99 and 2003, we probably got coaches, who had little to no experience in terms of being successful in the 15s arena, and we probably didn't have much in terms of outside influence. And probably one of the main things as well, which we still see to this day, is that the luxury of those earlier '91, '95 teams had is that because none of them were tied down to any major team contracts, they could meet earlier to train and bond together and get the culture up. Whereas what we're seeing now, even to this day, will probably only when it's a World Cup year that teams release you for extended period to meet up. And how hard is it, man? Like for like our tours, people are jumping on their flights, meeting at the place where you're having the tour, and like within 1 or 2 weeks, you're expected to field a team against a team that's just coming off say Six Nations, or coming off playing Super Rugby and all those kind of tests, together. So that's probably been one of the main hardships for not only Samoa but for all the poly teams, man. It's just not having enough time to build that bond and connection and trying to make that translate onto the field. But yeah, that's it from me, Stace.
Yeah, no, good thoughts there. And I probably agree with all of that, actually. And I've got similar sentiments there in regards to a lot of those things. But how about you, Roger, mate? Have you got any thoughts as to why the Manu hasn't kicked on? Like a lot of people thought they were going to become a tier one nation after the exploits in those early '90s. And we know now that that's not what happened. So, mate, just get some thoughts from you on that, on why.
Yeah, I think I remember when they brought in, because a lot of players, again, this is showing my age. Sale, when I was playing in the late 90s,
Oh, not when I was playing. Come on.
when I was playing in the late 90s, so the first time I played Prems was for Waitakere. And in 1999, that was a World Cup year. I didn't even know some of these players, yet there was Silao Lainga, who ended up scoring the most points for Manu Samoa at the Rugby World Cup '99. George Hara was, again, another one that was playing at Waitakere as well. And these were guys who were playing club rugby and then expected to go to a Rugby World Cup. And there were a lot of players like that, and other teams as well, minnows of what was compared to a lot of the top tier teams. That's how they were preparing. They were playing club rugby. They might get an opportunity playing NPC or provincial rugby before going over to the Rugby World Cup. But that was the type of players that were going. They weren't coming from Super 12 contracts like the All Blacks, the Australias, South Africa were at the time. They were players that were being garnered from Super Rugby, sporadic for Manu Samoa, but majority were just coming from club rugby and overseas as well. The Trevaliotas having to choose between club and rugby, club and country, because that was the contract. If they were told, and whether this is off record or on record, in clauses in their contract, they can't play for their country while they are, because if they do play for their country, they're not going to get paid because their contract was to play for their club wherever that would be, in Italy, France, or England. And so those were the challenges, and so we didn't really understand what was happening because we could only see, well, why don't they want to play for their country, and yet they're having to face the dilemma of, if we go, then there's no, I can't provide for my family if I do play for my country as much as they want to play for their countries. And a lot of these players have come out since and said the challenges that they faced and the challenges that some Pacific Island players still face in European clubs, because they've been put up with, club or country, and so whether they've now been able to factor those into their contracts, who knows? But even Census Johnson was in the last World Cup was still having to face that kind of a challenge, and so he was playing in France and allegedly had resigned from international rugby, and yet then turns up playing for Samoa in at the last minute, and that jeopardised his contract back in France. But he wasn't going to deal with it until post the World Cup. So if that's still happening for our players, in the late 2000s, 2010s, then there's something systematic that's wrong, and there's something where World Rugby's got to step in. Have they stepped in? We don't know. They started the Pacific Island Alliance. Pacific Island, what was the R for? Yeah, they started that in 2002 or 2004. Peter Schuster says 2004, and another place says 2002. And they got how many tours out of that? It was meant to be something between Fiji, Tonga, the Cook Islands, and Samoa that it was meant to be something to garner revenue for respective individual nations. However, we know how that turned out. They only had a few tours: 2004, 2006, and 2008, I believe. It was meant to. I think the idea was World Rugby wanted, or IRB at the time, wanted it to be every 4 years, similar to the British and Irish Lions. However, I think the Pacific Island nations were wanting it to be every 2 years, and their reason was because to gain finances, get support, sponsorship support, so that they can finance not only the Pacific Island rugby team, but also their individual unions back in the islands. But I think because of the revenue, Peter Schuster pulled Samoa out in 2009, and so it sort of fell. And I think the best thing to come out of the Pacific Island Rugby Alliance was, probably Sione Lawaki and Sitivini Sivivatu becoming All Blacks out of that 2004 tour. As well as, obviously some of these players that played for that Pacific Island, not necessarily getting the opportunity to play alongside some of the Pacific Island countrymen, but, that's something that they will, just like it is for a British and Irish, you normally play for your Scotlands or your Irelands and Englands, but then to come together and be able to play in that special team is something that is lost, and we only wish that, because that was the next best thing for our PI players that there was, without any Super Rugby exposure. And if you weren't a Brian Lima and a Fato So'oialo, To'ovaenga Stephen Bishop, then you had to go abroad to play. And I think the clash of investments as well as interest, the overseas clubs with their money, they had an invested sort of interest in just their club. They weren't interested where these international players were coming from and then going back to represent their respective Pacific Island nations. We could also go into saying it depowered, because they were being employed by overseas clubs. It depowered the Pacific Island nations, because now they're having to contend with their contracts to provide for their families and those loved ones back in the islands, or come back and play for nothing or play for very little to represent Samoa, Fiji, and Tonga in the autumn tests or the mid-year tests. And then, the end of year Northern Hemisphere tournament was something else again. And like you say, due to very little time together, lack of preparation, which a lot of the teams that are involved in Super, they don't have that, because they can easily, they've got the money, they've got the pulling power to be able to pull their team together and come together for a Rugby World Cup. And then we understand the logistics and the for want of a better term, hidden agendas of the timetabling of matches, where a lot of the minnows get less time between matches, as opposed to some of the tier 1, tier 2 teams get more time from a Saturday to a Saturday, as opposed to a Saturday and then play the next game on a Thursday or Wednesday. And I guess there's always going to be the logistical nightmares of how they do the pools and the matches throughout a tournament. But I think everyone's just asking for a fair shake and for enough time to recover from the last match, where we do see a lot of the time it favours the tier 1 teams.
Stacey. So I think all I got from what Roger was saying is that if it wasn't for the Pacific Islands, playing at the Chiefs would have never made Sione Lawaki to ever make the All Blacks.
yeah. Thanks, Rog, for your biased one-sidedness. Yeah. No.
But you look at it, because in that 2004 campaign, they allowed, it was meant to be for those that had already played for Pacific Island teams. The only two that hadn't played for any team, any national team, was Sione and Sivivatu. But then every other campaign thereafter, they had to be players who had represented Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, or another island nation like the Cooks. So yeah, it was interesting how that one played out. But obviously, Sione Lawaki and Sivivatu, they deserve to be All Blacks, but they shouldn't have. I feel that they shouldn't have used the Pacific Islands team for that purpose. But that's how the story panned out.
Yeah, it's no doubt that since the game's gone professional, the clubs have got more power because they've got more money, and then that's created, this massive disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And Dan Leo, a former Manu Samoa player, he's doing some great stuff with those Oceans Apart documentary and those little short movies that he's pulling out, where you can really see the disparity and some of the issues facing a lot of the Polynesian players, and that, which touches on back to what you've been mentioning, Rog, how they've been torn between club and country, and they're basically playing for nothing when they represent their countries, and that's where they're struggling a little bit. But I wanted to come back to something you both sort of touched on, something which I was also thinking of around. So Sully, you talked about the eligibility rules. So you can only represent one nation, and if some of the good players who they'll wait and wait and wait to try and make a tier 1 nation, and then when they don't make a tier 1 nation, that's when they'll take off overseas and then maybe turn up for the Manu in their late 20s or 30s. And that comes back to what you mentioned, Rog, where there was good quality players in Super Rugby who wouldn't put their hands up. So then Silao and George Harder and these other guys are getting caught out of club rugby. So this is another hard one. So I'm going to chuck these on the spot a little bit. But if I was to take all the Samoans in the tier 1 nations, like Adi Savia and Rico Ioane, Metomore from the Wallabies, and Bandiaki and Manu Tuilangi from the European nations. So all the best Samoans from the tier 1 nations, and put them on one side, and take the actual Manu Samoa team and put it on the other side, and got them to play against each other. The Samoans from the tier 1 team would probably smoke the Manu Samoa national team by 30 points. So how do we get more Samoans to play for Samoa? It's no easy one. I don't even have an answer for it, so I'll just chuck it out there. And if anyone wants to step forward and sort of say anything on that, just for our listeners, if anyone's got any thoughts, how can we get more people to turn out for Samoa?
I remember.
Similar to, sorry, I just want to say, similar to it's a little bit different sport and different eligibility rules, but the Tongan National Rugby League team, they went from nowhere to somewhere because people just decided to turn out for them. Now, obviously, their eligibility rules are a bit different, where they can jump back on the Kiwis or jump back to the Australian league team if they want to. But how do we catch? Is there any way we could catch something like that, catch some fire like that?
Just touching on 91 and remembering 91 and the feats that they were able to achieve to reach a quarterfinal, and then also the 99. And I remember in 91 as a 13-year-old, I remember it changed the mindset. People were like, now not just necessarily talking about, I want to play for the All Blacks. Because of that, they wanted to play for island kids, Samoan kids were wanting to play for the Manu, or Western Samoa as they were known back then. And then the more players that were now then come around Super Rugby. 94, I remember there was the Super 10, where Auckland was playing teams like North Queensland and playing the New South Wales, but Samoa was in the mix as well. Samoa played Auckland at Eden Park, and we just went along with it, and we just watched it, and then the more normal it became, I guess, to see your Samoan players playing, it meant that young kids wanted to be like them and represent Samoa. But I think it was just that then you had your sprinklings of players like your To'o playing for the Highlanders, Afatu So'alo for the Crusaders and Canterbury, Brian Lima back and forth between. For him to play for the Blues at a time where you had Joeli and Jonah Lomu, it said a lot about Brian Lima, and then still being a mainstay in Super Rugby, playing for the Highlanders in latter times. For someone to be that good, and yet he was not eligible to be an All Black, but he'd already played for Samoa and still considered to be good enough to not necessarily be in the squad, but also be in a starting stripping day team. It spoke a lot, and so I think it was that we were overdue. And I think with Moana Pasifika coming this year, we've been overdue a super team representation in a competition like Super Rugby, whether it be here or whether it be somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere. I think I hope is the answer, because we've lacked a super team or representation of some sort, whether it be a Pacific Island team. Didn't have to necessarily be, because there's always been talks about including a Samoan team, including a Pacific Island team into the mix to better their national endeavours. I think that's a missing ingredient, a big ingredient, because we've always had players go abroad and ply their trades in the France and the Englands and what have you. But I think, and then the coming together, we just don't gel quick enough. And because we've had caliber players come from all these amazing teams from all over the world, yet when we come together, we just don't get the results that we're sort of like wishing to achieve. And I think the answer has been a team, and we saw the transformation that happened with Argentina. Still, they've still got a lot of work to do, but having had the Jaguares in Super Rugby enhanced their team. In Argentina, it's predominantly an amateur game. There's no professionalism in Argentina itself. All the Los Pumas were all playing in Europe, and so that's where because they get employed, they get money. They can't make a living as rugby players in Argentina themselves. So the same thing applies to Samoa, to Fiji. In 2007, 2008, you had so many, the majority of Pacific Islanders playing in France was ridiculous, and Fiji was the leader of that out of the big island nations, and they were just sprinkled throughout the first division right through to the third division in France and England. And so therein lies the problem, is that we've got all this talent, homegrown talent, all playing abroad. And that's inclusive of New Zealand and Australia as well. And then it's just that coming together, because you even have to go back to Joel Levanderi, and then in his prime was the prime that Joely sort of spent waiting in that 3-year period where he had stood down for the All Blacks. He only got to play for the All Blacks twice once he was eligible, but because he played for Fiji in 95, we didn't get to see the best of Joely in the All Blacks colours, but we got to see him on the super stage for yes. the Blues, as well as for Counties Manukau. So, and that's the thing, eligibility is massive, but also and I guess we never saw the Joel Levanderis on an international stage for Fiji because of that stand-down period. But yeah, he's the All Black that never was.
Mm-hmm. Sally, got any thoughts on how we can get more Samoan eligible players to try and turn out for Samoa?
I reckon so firstly, we've got to make sure we sort out our affairs at home in terms of the Samoan Rugby Union. We've got to incentivize. It is enough to play for pride for the jersey, but it may not be that much that we can offer. But there's got to be some things that we can work around in order to provide these players with some sort of. It doesn't have to be financial, but some sort of like incentives in order to put on the jersey. Man, like if you're a big union like Rugby Samoa and you're run by the Prime Minister, surely there's something you can do. Like say like for me, I would use all my resources in terms of like hey, look, you play for the Manu. Yeah, we're cool. We can't give you this much money, but hey, we'll give you some exclusive like rights in terms of like purchasing land, or give you some help with your family back at home. Stuff that will make the players play. Like they probably earn more than enough money with whatever contracts that they're on. So money shouldn't be an issue for them. Yet the logistics and getting from their clubs to the islands or wherever they're playing, that will probably be the main issue. But I think for them, the biggest issue has always been the fact that let's cool, sweet. We may not have the most money, but let's just see where the money goes and make sure it is used the right way in terms of looking after the team, but as well as growing the sport within Samoa as well. And over the last couple of years since that whole John Campbell thing came out, I think Samoa are heading in the right direction. I think we've got some good coach, like the fact that we've got say Lala Mahonri and all of those guys back on board. That was the blueprint in terms of how to build Samoa. Cool, sweet. We got all these players playing tier one rugby representative in those countries, and they're pretty much coming to play for peanuts. But what's more important is the fact that they're playing for the people, and that's what we need to really reinstill back into the jersey. Because if you're gonna try and pledge for Samoa and hoping that you're gonna get financially sorted, it is never gonna happen. But I think I think the Manu Samoa Rugby Union Board need to work harder in terms of incentivizing playing for the jersey, because the boys will always play for pride. They will always play for the people, but we've got to repay that faith in some way. It's the loyalty that we need to reinstill back into the jersey. So, most of those people have connections in terms of to the different resources or the different like places in Samoa, man. If that was me, man, I'll just be like, man, hey, look, I can help out with your families, like once a year, come to this resort and we'll look after you, like stuff like that, like it is
I
back,
like it. I like
it is backdoor dealings, but hey, bro, it's being creative.
Yes.
It's being it's being creative, man. Because
what happens, Sully? What happens when they get kicked out of the Manu Samoa? Do they still get the backdoor deal?
Oh, bro, look at it this way. Yeah, cool. You can support the businesses in Samoa, and like maybe if you do play for that team for that year, you can get either a really good discount or for free. But look at it this way: the All Blacks, as well as every other tier one nation, but also the club teams in those tier one nations. As soon as you've kept for them, you are an exclusive member of that team. In terms of, as soon as you retire, you still get all the perks of being part of that team. And I don't see why there shouldn't be any reason for players who have put on the Manu Samoa jersey to get some sort of exclusive not rights, but what's the word? Whatever the word is, but like with the All Blacks, as soon as you've whether it's 120 tests, you still get tickets sent to your house to attend any of the home match games. You can still turn up and attend the player, the what do you call it, the different areas that are exclusive to former players. So stuff like that we need to obviously it's not going to be massive in Samoa, but hey man, let's see what we can do. You put on that blue jersey, you get looked after not only on the field but off the field. Not only when you're playing for Samoa, but after you've done playing for Samoa. That's something that they need to look at in order to boost more and more players. Because at the end of it, the rugby circle is so small, especially the professional sport, the professionals. So of course it's the text, of course it's word of mouth, how you're treated within the camp, how you're treated after you've put on the blue jersey. Stuff like that, you look after them after their career, look after them off the field. That little stuff will build to, creating a better culture and better environment for anyone coming into the team and anyone who wants to be loyal to the blue jersey.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about. Some ideas, thinking outside the box a little bit. So, Tuilaupa, if you're listening out there, try it on, man. We need to come up with some better ideas. I don't think he's Prime Minister anymore, so he should have some extra time to dedicate to the Manu.
Well, that's what I don't get. I don't get in 2017 when the then Samoan Prime Minister Tuilaepa announcing that Lakapi Samoa or Samoa Rugby Union was bankrupt, and then that was sort of squashed by World Rugby, who disagreed with that. That can't be the case. So, I mean, like what Sully is saying, if we can't look after our own players and we can't even take care of our backyard, how are we supposed to be entrusted with, money that comes from the World Rugby on a yearly basis or however, um, whatever the frequency is? It's just,
And that's
and
always
that's
been the
why.
issue. It's how it's the mishandling of the funds that World Rugby Union gives,
Yeah,
man. Look, like
and that's what they're wanting to have their own team and run their own team by Samoans for Samoans, but we can't even look after our own. And so, how are we going to be entrusted with bigger or other ventures such as a team involved in Super Rugby or whatever up in the Northern Hemisphere in the Premiership? We just can't do it because we don't have the track record for it either.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. The administration side, so it's got to be sort of top down and get the books and everything sorted at the front office, and then that sort of stuff filters down. We've seen that before with a lot of professional teams where the well-run teams seem to do a lot better than some teams that are just constantly underachieving because they're just poorly run. So the Manu has to really sort that side of the game out as well.
And I guess
They
that's
can't just
where
keep relying
they
on the
stay.
handouts and stuff.
It's
Yep.
it's got to be like it's not. I mean, I'm all for having an all Samoan team or an all Samoan or all Pacific run ship, but for me, I believe it's just the best people for it take the helm. And I remember when John Bowe was our Manu Samoa coach from 2000 to 2003, and the challenges that he had to face just because you had to be based in Samoa, and the politics behind that we were not always exposed to. Best intentions to just try and get the team up and running and do the best for the Manu, but when they're facing challenges coming from the outside, um, is hard as well when you're trying to keep the team first and foremost. And I don't know whether those are the same sort of challenges that guys like Michael Jones had, Brian Williams prior to him as well. I mean, there's a whole list of coaches who have come through. Just going through some of them. Where are these? Some more coaches. Yeah, John Bowe was 2000 to 2003. Before him was Brian Williams. You had Titi Maea Tafua, Nico Palamo before him, 2008 to 2009.
yeah,
And
Titi was
so,
probably our best coach, man.
yeah, Titi's, especially he garnered a good team, especially running into that World Cup. Then he came back for a short stint, 2017 to 18. But yeah, I mean, Stephen Beetham was another one that came in after the World Cup. But I was hoping for big things when Alama was announced there. And you had Stephen Jackson. But with Seilala Mapasua now, hopefully, he's like some of those before him have played for Samoa and now coaching Samoa. So hopefully their input can make a difference. I'm not too sure. Is Tulaipa still the president of the union?
I haven't heard anything different. He's got a bit more time on his hands, so I don't know if he'd relinquish that role, but yeah, no, I believe so. Although we might need a fact check there. Yeah, no, but that's right, boys. A lot of good thoughts there, and a lot of things that I agree with. So they need to sort the admin out. They need to get more players, have a bit more, offer a bit more things, sort of maybe off the field, some backyard dealings to get it over the line if that's what they need to do with the current eligibility rules. A lot of things as to why they haven't really kicked on. But yeah, I mentioned before the game went professional after the '95 World Cup, which is the last time we made the quarterfinals. And yeah, once the game went pro, I suppose one of the arguments which you've touched on a bit, Rog, was for the modern Australian is that it could be linked to the fact that they haven't had a professional franchise team to bridge the gap. You're picking these guys from club rugby and then chucking them into the international stage, and that's just such a massive jump. And I suppose that brings me to Moana Pasifika. So just for our listeners out there, maybe a bit unsure, Moana Pasifika is a new Super Rugby team that's competing from next year, 2022 onwards. It'll be made up of 80% players that are eligible for Pacific countries and 20% from sort of random places. So do we think this is going to help the Manu going forward? Sally, do you want to have a crack at that one? You think that Moana Pasifika is going to help the Manu Samoa?
Yeah, I think it will help. I think what we need to first sort out quickly is let. I'm all for getting experience in, but this team is about breeding our own talent. People who are actually going to pledge their allegiance for either Samoa or Tonga, or whether we get Fijians into the team, I'm not too sure. So that's one thing that we need to filter out real quick. And I love the fact that, we've got Skopje Kepu, cool. We've got Christian Lally Funnel, but these are guys that are at the back end of their careers that are not going to contribute to any of these home nations, and that's the whole reason, or the main, what was the main of one of the main driving forces in terms of their plea to get our team in was to help out our home nations. And then you're going to do the opposite thing by recruiting players who can't play for our home nations. So, like, one thing we've got to quickly sort is, after this year, moving forward, we've got to get players who contractually are going to pledge their allegiance. Yeah, cool. You can be eligible to play for the All Blacks. Cool. Then find a different Super Rugby franchise. But when you come play for the Moana Pasifika, you have to have the intentions of putting on a jersey for one of these Pacific home nations. That's one thing that we got to need to sort. The second thing is that we've got to make sure that there's some opportunities to get into the team. So, like, we've got to make sure that we do bring on some of our players from the islands. I know their level of rugby will never be there, but we've got to make a start somewhere, right? And if we can bring in players or even coaches or some sort of any managers or coaches from overseas, we've got to make like some sort of like a connection or a network with them, just so that, because we've got some good coaches and within the ranks at Moana Pasifika, it would be awesome if those guys can get the experience to take it back to the home countries and then use that experience to build up the players there. That's probably the two main points for me. Just make sure that we have players that are coming into the team that can play and pledge their allegiance for the home countries, and then as well as making sure that there's some sort of program in order to bring in players. Cool, you might not be on contract, but let's like help these players grow, so that, as well as the coaches that we bring in, help them grow, so that when they do go back to the home countries, that they can help teach those skills, teach those abilities that they've learned with being in the Moana Pasifika camp, and then help that grow the game back home. Because at the end of the day, that's probably where we need to address the issue most, is not in New Zealand where Moana Pasifika is based, but is actually back in the home islands. If we get their talent levels up, it's never going to reach, obviously, it's never going to reach Super Rugby or Mitre 10, but if we can get them up to a level where it's consistent with the club level that we see on a weekly basis, man, that'll be awesome for our players moving forward.
Yeah, good thoughts there. What about you, Roger, mate? What do you think? You think Moana Pasifika is going to make a big difference to getting the Manu back up?
Well, they'll contribute to an extent, because obviously they're talking about having Tongans in there that are eligible for Ikaletahi, whether the Drua have the bulk of Fijian players contracted to them. But, you never know, because Moana Pasifika will still be open to having Fijian eligible players as well, I suppose, being a Pacific rugby team. But I think, like, I sort of second everything that Sully said. But my only issue is that, you're going to have that 20% of players who will come in, whether they've already played for another international country, like the likes of Lali Whanu and Kepu. But then you're going to also, it opens up the question for players who haven't played for any nation, and whether they come in with the intention initially to play for one of the island nations, but then who knows, they could then get scouted and get drafted into an All Black training camp.
Yeah, exactly.
If they're that good. Hey, so that's the loophole, because you say it's for the Pacifica teams and that, but I guess that's where one of the sort of injustices from a Pacific standpoint would be is that they get put into another, whether it's Australia or the All Blacks, being close to home. South Africa will be out of stretch if someone was to come in and play and be eligible for South Africa. Although there is that one. No. I can't remember who it was. One of the wingers. Talea. Hey, that played for the Blues. He's South African and Samoan. Yeah, so he'll be the only one. But I guess in terms of pathway, yep, I really second that with what Sully was saying. But then also even going to more grassroots is that, from what I know, that super teams have the under-20s program, or the development program. So that's where, if you have a similar Moana Pasifika under-20s, and that will gain the interest of younger players coming through. Yes, I really do want to play for a Pacific team, and if Moana Pasifika is that pathway where we go through that that grade group, and then graduate into the fully fledged senior team. But again, there's wiggle room that they go through any development, and then you could be under 20s for the Chiefs, but then you'll be playing senior rugby down at the Highlanders. So I guess those are some of the challenges ahead for trying to capture our talent and remaining Pacific focused. But again, it's just another pathway, another sort of route for young players as well as PI players to go on to higher honours. And I guess that's the number one sort of purpose. But we know that there's sort of other avenues that can take hold, and if other teams become interested for our players. But I think it's a good step in the right direction, especially having a super team, whatever form it is, and we've got it in the form of Moana Pasifika, and we can only hope for big things. And I think their intention is to try, like you say, Sully, we don't want to be just making up the numbers. We want to get off to a really good start and be competitive. What I don't understand in previous years, where they've gone with the Japan Sunwolves, where they've gone with the Haguares, if they really want to invest in Pacific rugby, they should have been done a long, long time ago. But how has Super Rugby benefited Japan? We could say, yeah, Sunwolves have, but then Japanese rugby, they've been professionals for a long, long time, and they have players playing all around the world before the advent of the Sunwolves. So I don't really get as to why the Sunwolves were even looked at in terms of a financial benefit. That's the only thing I can put my finger on. It didn't really serve Super Rugby, let alone Japanese rugby, too much, because a lot of those Sunwolves players were from all over the place. You had your journeyman like your Lockie Molly that used to play for the Blues, Club Rugby in Auckland, Michael Little, who the great Walter Little's son, playing there as well. But then you had other players, a guy named Jared, can't remember his surname, Stowers, I think it was. He was a prop for Counties and later Auckland. I think he's now playing for the Turbos.
Jared Adams,
Adams. So he was floating around Super Rugby with the Sunwolves. So and you got to go where the opportunities lie. And so good on him for doing that. And who knows? Is he another one that's in the picture for? Because I don't think he's had any international ties, and he's currently down at the Turbos, like Ray Nuia, like Eddie Fidel, both Manu players. So there's Moana Pasifika in their horizons.
Gotta be.
Yeah.
Because they're quality players.
I think those two are definitely.
Sorry, Sully, you want to add something?
No. I agree with everything Rog said. I think I just hope that moving forward that it does help out our home nations. Like, I'm sick of having this feeling of waiting every 4 years and then come to the World Cup, and it's just utter disappointment. The good thing about Moana Pasifika is that now me and Rog can support the same team. So
For once.
we can all support the same team. Hey man, if you guys are up for it, man, we'll become season ticket holders, bro, and we'll go support our boys. Whether they get pumped or what, I reckon the support's gonna be crazy. It's gonna be good to Samoan and Tongan. If Moana Pasifika are smart, they're gonna create a flag that everyone can bloody go crazy with, at the field. So that's probably one of the main best things is that it's not just with Rogers, for all my other boys, whether they're Hurricanes, Highlanders, or whatever team that they support. Now we can all cheer for the one team.
Yep. Yeah, nice boys. Good. I agree with all of that, boys. Good thoughts there, especially that under 20s point, Raj. I'm not sure what the plan is for that, but you got to have that sort of regeneration of the next talent. A lot of the kids coming through. You can't just pick all these guys and they all retire, and then you've got no juniors or anything like that. So hopefully they've got something sorted out like that. And I'd like to see them maybe pick someone from Manu Samoa under 20s or the Tongan under 20s, just like to develop them, and then in sort of 2 or 3 years they can kick on and play for Moana Pasifika
Well,
moving forward.
I was reading an article just before coming on, and it was Sale Mapasua, who has been in talks with, his former teammate, both at down in they used to be New Zealand 20s together,
Yeah,
and then
Highlanders.
obviously so I think that's good. That's encouraging that there's those avenues are open. Those channels are open for the current Manu coach and the Moana Pasifika coach. So obviously, say Lala is from his perspective, he's going to push as many Manu eligible players down by way of Moana Pasifika, and at the same time, it's as much as it's Pacifica sort of aimed team, but then it's not going to still stop Pacific eligible players to play in other franchises as they are already doing so. So it just opens up and I guess that's where we just got to take. It's a bit of tongue in cheek, but I guess that's where players who are eligible for the All Blacks and who haven't represented the All Blacks or Australia or whatever other international team are going to be able to do the same by way of Moana Pasifika. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but I think so long as the number one priority is to further the Pasifika cause, we just got to run with it. But yeah, exciting times. Looking forward to Moana Pasifika's debut season, and hopefully it's a good one. And yeah, hopefully it's not like a Sunwolves venture, but
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. But hopefully there'll be some names that will be made from Moana Pasifika that will go on to future World Cups for their respective island nations.
yeah. I'd actually be gutted if that happened, like similar to the Pacific Islanders concept. So let's say they have a whole full season of Super Rugby next year, and there's one or two guys who just come out of nowhere and really stand out, and then the All Blacks say, "Oh yeah, we'll take you guys like they did with Lawaki and Sivi Vatu." So I'd be gutted if that happened. If like two guys sort of just that they picked came up from nowhere, and then All Blacks said, "Yep," came knocking on their door. But just for our listeners and just for you guys as well, if you're not sure, so they've announced 4 official signings so far. So Christian Yalifano from Australia, so he's obviously played for the Wallabies already, and he must be one of the 20% who are non-eligible Pacific players. Ere Inari, he's been a backup halfback at the Crusaders. So he's in that neutral zone that we've talked about, where he hasn't got an official declared allegiance yet, but he's got Samoan heritage, so he could turn up for the Manu Samoa, or if he carves up next year, could be the All Blacks might come knocking on his door. And 2 other guys got announced today, so Sione Tuipolotu and Solomone Funaki. They both played for the Tongan national team, loose forwards, and they're playing ITM Cup at the moment. So I'm not sure if they would have got Super Rugby contracts without Moana Pasifika. So that's a bonus because they'll get exposed to a higher level of rugby, which will help them in their national teams when they go back to the Tongan national team. So just the 4 official signings. I think you mentioned Sekope Kepu there, Saleh. That seems to be like one of like a worst kept secret. They haven't officially announced it yet, but I think it's pretty obvious that he's one of the guys that's going to be there, and he's Australian, so yeah.
Yeah. I think I've got some of my mates or inside sources. I think that they've probably got. I mean, hopefully Ma'anono, as well as I think Eddie Fidel should definitely make it.
Yep.
Alamanda Motunga, he's definitely. I'm pretty 100% sure that he's pretty much in the team.
Well,
But
he's running around ITM, isn't he?
yeah, and he's been county's best player for 2 seasons now. So I think Sam Slade might be in there as well. So it's a good mix, man. But yeah, definitely looking forward to see what other signings are.
Yep.
Oh,
Good.
sorry, Stacey, to interrupt. Who do you reckon will be our 10? Or who do you reckon the Moana Pasifika will pick up as 10?
Do you see PC out of retirement? No, I don't know.
Isn't Christian Lalifano
Oh, right.
a
Yeah, of
10?
course.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
he'll
that's right.
be there, but then you'll need an understudy. You need someone that, who would they have out? They'll have at least 3 guys that can play 10.
What about D'Angelo? Isn't he still running around in Auckland?
Nah,
Who's
he's
that?
done. He's done it.
D'Angelo.
He's done at Waikato. D'Angelo,
Oh, okay. Yep.
Leua, Leua.
Oh yeah, from
Leuila,
Papatoetoe.
sorry.
From
Yeah,
Papatoetoe.
yeah. He wasn't he on the bench for the Manu as well. So he did really well when he came on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I reckon he'll be in a mix, eh?
Yeah,
But then you've got
should be.
also Dwayne from Pakuranga. I think
Dwayne
he's
at number
in the
9.
Auckland Water squad. Or no, Makos. I think he's Tasman Makos. But yeah, there's a lot of players that are Manu Samoa. Like you got your Lay brothers, James Lay, but then I was surprised with even before the announcements because I just recently learned that Michael Alaalatoa he's now playing overseas.
He would have been great for us.
Yeah. So I thought he was a shoo-in, but obviously now he's taken up a contract over the northern hemisphere.
He's on that
Wanted to change the
he's probably looking to financially secure himself now, eh?
Yeah.
But you never know. He might turn up on the one of the next few years. He's got a 2-3 year contract up there, but leading up to the World Cup, I reckon he's a shoo-in for the next World Cup for Samoa.
Yeah.
Be the close to captaincy.
You guys been watching much of the Hawke's Bay games? Is there first to 5 Pacific Islander? That McClutchy or something? He looks like a brown boy, but I'm not too sure what he is exactly.
Oh, I'm not sure.
No, not sure. But there's a few Hawke's Bay guys who could be getting the call up, eh? Because they got a couple there. I think Rod, you mentioned.
Yeah, you got Lolangi Visinia that's floating around still. You got him. But then, again, he falls into that 20% bracket because he's played for the New Zealand Sevens.
Okay.
Yeah, so whether he'll get I'm not sure. There's pretty good competition for it. He'll be a wing fullback if considered. Who else was there? There's a junior Matautia, who's a first 5 come fullback playing out of Bay of Plenty. He debuted today. Whether it's too early to consider him, but I reckon he'll be a player of the future. Not just because he's come out of the Waitemata rugby club, but yeah. But Nico Jones, I still put my money on Nico Jones whether he'll be a signing moving forward.
I don't know if the Blues would let him go. Even though they've got loose swords galore, he's got the potential to be the next something. So you might just hold on him. But yeah, good thoughts there, boys, on Moana Pasifika, and we're all hoping that that's going to make a big difference to the Manu Samoan and the Tonga national team as well, that they can help get back up to where we want them to be and where I think they should be. So given their contributions to other tier 1 nations, Samoa, and to World Rugby, I'll say to World Rugby. But we're just about to wrap up our podcast, boys. So we'll get some final thoughts just on the Manu Samoa, the World Cup, or anything to Manu Samoa related. Roger, mate, have you got anything you want to say just in closing for our podcast about Manu Samoa, Moana Pasifika, anything that we're talking about today?
I think since '91 we've always had massive hopes that Manu Samoa would, get past that 95, get past the quarterfinal stage, or even just do well. And I think 2011 was a real massive opportunity for us, which we let slip by. But then, Manu Samoa, regardless of what state of affairs their financial backing or administration is in, they've always got the backing of the people. They're the people's team. They're going to be forever a fan favourite. So always supporting our team, regardless of whether we support another national team like the All Blacks. But in terms of Moana Pasifika moving forward as well, we're hoping what we've touched on, we haven't really touched on the draw, but I think hopefully they're two teams they can complement each other, because obviously they want to further their cause for Fiji, and then you've got Moana Pasifika, Tongan, Samoa, and then also Fiji as well. So whether you'll see some other players, because we're not sure whether it's going to be strictly Fijian players. Obviously they're going to be wanting to do that and have as many Fijian eligible players in the draw, but who knows? You might see other players that are eligible for Tonga and Samoa playing throughout Fiji draw as well. So, but looking forward to it.
Yep. Nice thoughts there, brother. How about you, Sally, mate? Anything you want to say just in closing up?
Yeah, no, man. I'm just real optimistic with Moana Pasifika moving forward. I think it was an awesome decision having them based at Mount Smart, because it's obviously a smaller stadium.
Yep.
So and hopefully it's not a money grabbing scheme where they bloody hike up the price tickets. Like for a small team like that, we want to see back the
Yeah, that's
the
right.
$10 tickets, man. Like let's. If anything, who cares? Yeah, adults will pay what, $20 or 30. But let's get the kids in, man. The whole reason, another massive reason for this team is to inspire the future of our Pacific Nation rugby team. So we need to get the kids in. We need to get the players to play for, not only the team they're representing or the country they're playing for, but as well as the future of the sport who might be watching. So I hope that's another main thing that they're looking to do, and I'm real optimistic, and I can't wait to be hand in hand with Rog and support our new team together.
on that note, because you said about the kids, like my son already, envisaging in his own sort of talks, he's saying that if he doesn't play for the Chiefs, he's going to play for Moana Pasifika for life.
Yeah, bro, have to, man.
So that's the kind of conversations that young
Yeah.
kids are already having and wanting to represent their team or Moana Pasifika.
Yeah,
so
man.
that's what it's all about. So I agree.
100%.
Is that your son saying it, or is that is that the dad saying,
No.
you're in Auckland, you're not allowed to play for the Blues? Come on, mate.
Hey, that's what he said. No conversation while he's weed whacking.
Yeah. Yeah, good thoughts there, boys. Thanks for your time, boys. Yeah, it's great to take this time to reflect back on, the glory days of the Manu Samoa. You do sort of have to take it with a grain of salt, knowing that, we haven't kicked on since those halcyon days of the 91 and 95 World Cups. You guys have given a lot of good reasons, a myriad of reasons as to why that's not the case. And with the addition of Moana Pasifika, I think, Sally, you mentioned that word optimism, and that's how I feel as well. I think we've all got that feeling that we can return to those glory days again. It's going to take a lot of things to get over the line, but I think having our own professional team is a step in the right direction. We talked about the quarterfinals of the 91 World Cup. That's sort of been one of the things we're focused on. But looking at the pool they were in, so Australia, Wales, Manu Samoa, and Argentina. If that was the last World Cup, we probably would have come last, which just shows how far we've dropped. So he is hoping, with Moana Pasifika, some better development programs, maybe some backhand deals, which Sully mentioned. Hopefully, with these things in place, we can get back up and go to the quarterfinals, and even beyond that. Man, I would love to see them take one step further, but, just to get to the playoffs, because we haven't made the playoffs for 25 odd years. So it'd be good to get back up there again. So yeah, thanks, boys. Really appreciate you guys' support on the podcast and your knowledge. Also, thanks to our listeners for joining us for another episode of the Counter Ruck. And a quick mention, we've been nominated for the New Zealand Podcast Awards. So there's a People's Choice Award now, which has come out. So if any of our listeners could take time to vote for us, and it would be much appreciated. All the details are on our Facebook page. and I'll send it out on our Twitter page. So check our socials for more details on that, and just the usual stuff. The Counter Ruck's available through the usual podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher. There's a couple more which I can't remember, but wherever you find your podcast will be on there. So keep listening, and don't forget to click subscribe. Boys, Sale, the Manu guy, Rog, mate, your knowledge and your enthusiasm, can appreciate it so much, boys. So thanks for jumping on, boys, and we'll be back again hopefully soon.
MP, Moana
MP.
Pasifika.
See you guys, boys.
Oh, Rog, I forgot to mention that you got one of the jerseys, the early jerseys.